Hello, everyone. Welcome to my podcast and my YouTube channel. Today, we're going to cover a theme that I've never talked about on my podcast. And I'm so glad that Michelle Collins contacted me. She sent me two of her books. She's an author, she's also a wellness coach, a yoga therapist, and a suicide loss survivor. But what we're going to talk about today, Michelle, and I want to learn from your knowledge. I read your books, I read both, but I decided that this would be the topic for the interview, which is how to help loss survivors. So, for those of you who are you may be a loss survivor as well, but if you have a partner or a spouse, and I know you have so many questions on how can I help, how can I support my partner or my spouse, this is what we're going to cover today. And before we begin, I was actually talking to Michelle, and I told her that this came in the perfect time because in my last session with my group, I facilitate a loss survivor group, a support group. I had someone come in and actually he came in for that. He brought in his wife and he said, Paula, I came here because I don't know what to do. I don't know if I should be silent. I don't know if I should ask her how she's doing. Sometimes that's the right thing to do. Sometimes that's the wrong thing to do. So I'm here to learn. So I thought about him when I saw your book and I said, okay, this is perfect because there's so many of you out there. We cover so much of loss survivors here, their experience. And of course, we're going to talk about yours as well, Michelle, but I want to focus on that. So, how can you, as a spouse or a partner, help your spouse if they've lost a loved one to suicide? So, with that very long introduction, welcome to my podcast, Michelle, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Paula. I'm happy to be here.
So tell us first, your two books. You have one for loss survivors, and you have one for the spouse or partner. So tell us a little bit
For,
about
yeah.
which one came first. That's a question I have.
Well, they actually came out as twins, to be
Mm.
honest. I worked for 5 years on the first book, which is Surviving Spouse or Partner Suicide Loss, a mindful guide for your journey through grief. I use mindfulness in my grief coaching and wellness coaching and yoga therapy as really the primary tool to recover and grow through challenges. And so that book I worked on for years and years, and it was really hard because I started just, I got the calling to write it a year after my husband Glenn died by suicide. And then um, the next year I started writing it, and it just had so many starts and stops. So finally, the day that I finished the manuscript and turned it into my publisher for, the editing process, that night I went to bed and I was so excited to finally have turned this in. And then I get another call from the universe, whoever God, divinity, whatever you want to call it. You have to write a companion book for companions of people who have lost their spouse or partner to suicide. So the people who are left.
Hmm.
And I was so irritated because I just wanted a day off,
I
right? After
know.
5 years. But I've also learned over the years that when you get a very loud message from spirit, you listen. So I quickly, basically, it's the same book, but it's modified for supporters so that the primary person who has lost someone would read the survivor book, and then the supporter book is read by their primary supporter. And that way, they both know the skills and tools that I offer and practices that I offer to help get through the nearly impossible to survive
Hmm.
loss.
Yeah. You
So they
mentioned,
were
oh,
published
sorry.
on the same day,
Same day? Wow.
which I highly recommend to any aspiring authors out there. Don't do that. One book,
Really?
yeah, not two on the same day. It's not a good idea. I
Yeah.
wish I would have done it
Even
separately
for the
now, but
marketing, right? Even for the marketing, it's confusing to have both. Yeah.
yeah.
I you were talking about this and I'm thinking, I couldn't do that. One book is enough. I've had three books published, but in the mental health area, only one. And I don't think I could do that. Not two. It's intense enough to have one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah. So Michelle, before we talk about Glenn, because I want to do that and your experience, why mindfulness? Why do you think that that's the most important tool?
Great question. And it's mostly my own experience, but it's also a lot of research and study. I really think that if you want to translate mindfulness in the most simple way, it's awareness. And I have a slide in the talks that I give that I just love, but I probably can't pop it up right now. But it shows that when you use awareness in any situation, you step back from the intensity of the emotion and you're aware that you're having this emotion. For example, when you get angry, you feel anger, right? Often you will say, I am angry. But if you're using mindfulness, if you're mindful and aware of your situation, you
Mhm.
realize I am feeling anger right now. And I know that anger will pass because all emotions do. So it's like you're looking at it with a more higher functioning brain part, right? Rather than just the emotional reactive part. And it can make everything in your life more manageable. So
Mhm.
that's my punchline. Mindfulness, I call it magic.
Yeah.
I really
And
think
I
it can ease our suffering.
Yeah, and you said something that I think that's what makes the difference because it's counterintuitive. When I do talk to my clients about that, I always bring up how to deal with emotions, right? And this especially mindfulness, and it's the best thing to do is to hold it. Hold your emotion, acknowledge. That's the only thing your
Mhm.
emotions ever ask. Acknowledge me. Don't distract. Don't run away from it. Don't stifle it. But it is counterintuitive because if you think about it, so, well, if I'm going to concentrate on it, it's going to grow. But it's actually the opposite. And you use the word that is the main key to that. It's a different area of the brain. So you get away from the intensity actually, and you come to your prefrontal, right? And you say, okay, let's look at this and let's try to understand and to acknowledge.
Right. And the prefrontal part of your brain also knows this is going to pass. And it can also tell your body that is probably reacting very strongly and trying to hijack, right? Trying to take over everything in fight, flight, or freeze. The prefrontal can say, hey, you know what? We're not under attack right now. Everything's okay, and
We're
take you
safe.
into, like a mind body connection. I'm sitting in my chair, focus on my breathing, and get you to realize that you're safe right now. And that's, when you're post traumatic, your body's always trying to tell you that you're not safe, right? You're having all of these really strong feelings of fear. So it can help to settle those things by being aware. Okay, I'm feeling fear right now. And the reason I'm feeling fear is, fill in the blank.
Hmm.
And then you just settle back in. It's just the
It is.
best.
It's magical, isn't it? I even tell my clients talk to it. Talk to your
Yeah.
emotion like it's an entity. Yeah.
Yeah, that's brilliant because you're separating from it. You're
Mhm.
like I said at the very beginning, you're not anger, you're not angry. You are experiencing the emotion of anger.
Mhm.
And that
Michelle,
just that awareness, that shining the light on it,
mhm.
get take disempowers it.
So tell us about Glenn.
Hmm. So Glenn and I had both been married before, and we each had 3 kids, and we were introduced about a year after both of our divorces to each other from a mutual friend. And we just, it was like, I don't even know what words to use, like a magnet, like a black hole, like a hurricane. It was a really, really intense connection. And a week after we met, he asked me to marry him,
Wow.
and I
That is
know
intense.
it was, and I said no. I mean, we each had 3 kids, and they were almost all teenagers. There was a lot
Mm.
happening.
Yeah, it's a lot.
um, he lived in the next state up. I lived in Oregon. He lived in Washington, and just across. So it wasn't, but it could be an hour. sometimes if with traffic and it but we made it work because we were so in love. It was so intense that it was like we were just going to bring everyone into our vortex and let them feel our love. And this was it'll be 10 years ago this year that we met, and I have so much 2020 hindsight about it now. But at the time, I was completely blinded. I felt like he was everything I ever wanted. Where have you been all my life? We used to ask each other. And so 3 months after we met, we got married and we moved in. We merged our families, and we both had exes, so the kids went back and forth, and it was messy, and we got a puppy, and it was just I know, right? I
It
still
wasn't
have this
enough to have those
no,
kids?
I still have this dog,
Wow.
actually. She's
Oh.
adorable. Her name's Happy. She's so
Oh.
cute. But it just it was as if we were both so thirsty for this type of connection that when we found it, we just kind of got blinded to everything else. And
Mm.
like I said, in retrospect, I do see how difficult it was for our children and our families and other relationships because it was so fast. But of course, I can't go back and change the past. Um, and I we had so much fun. Glenn was the funniest guy. Like, he's the kind of person where when he gets to the party starts. You know, he was so funny and he told these incredible stories. He was a retired Navy SEAL, so he had some stories.
Mm.
And he would tell them, nothing classified, of course, but with sound effects and gestures. And he was hilarious. Everything was funny and fun. And then it wasn't. Pressure
Mm.
started building up with both of our ex spouses, the kids. Um, he had some challenges at his job. He was now working for Homeland Security. He was already retired from the military when I met him. And he just, we both, it wasn't just him, we were self soothing in all the wrong ways. We were using drugs and alcohol and partying and things that just were not, they were just making things worse. But of course, we couldn't see that from the inside. And eventually, he got very irrational. He started to get, have these times where he was just acting like someone I didn't even know.
Mm.
And eventually, we separated because he had gotten physically violent. And once that happened, anger
Yeah.
overcame, like, the fear of him overcame anything else because he had
Wow.
talked about suicide
Mm.
um, about 3 months earlier. And so I just put down everything as far as working on the relationship and just, let's get you therapy. Let's get you, he came to yoga. I was teaching yoga and he'd come to my classes, meditate, all of the things that were supposed to help. And for some people,
Mm.
they don't.
Yeah.
Um, and so after we separated, he got worse and eventually took his life after a few weeks.
Wow. And how
Yeah.
long did it take for that to escalate?
Gosh, I don't know that I would be able to answer that. I think because it wasn't like a light switch. It wasn't like
Mm.
one
Mm.
day he was my loving, amazing husband, and the next day he was this irrational, scary person.
Mm.
I saw like little glimmers of it even from the beginning, you know.
Now looking back, that's
Right.
now
Like
when
maybe a month or two into our relationship, I had like this, that was kind of a weird behavior. But then he would be normal. So I would think it was
Mhm.
just a little, like, oh, he was upset, whatever. And, because it happened slowly and because I was so in love with him,
Yeah.
I didn't see clearly. I didn't
Mhm.
see the behaviors clearly. So
Yeah.
it escalated probably the whole time.
Yeah, you just couldn't see it.
Right.
You Yeah. I'm sorry, Michelle, that you had to go through. It wasn't just a loss then. You
Yeah.
kind of you lost him throughout the years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ah,
Exactly.
how are your
Thank you
kids
for that.
doing?
Um, each of them is handles it in their own way. I mean, when he died, they ranged in age from 13 to 19, right? Something like that. And so, teenagers and trauma, um, it's been tough. It's been
Yeah.
tough, but they're all survivors,
Mm.
and they've all managed it. I'm sure they're doing their best.
Yeah, and I'm sure that for you to write this book, because you did a lot of research for it, for sure, it has helped you understand a lot. Not just the
Hmm.
things you didn't see, but also how to deal with it afterwards.
Yeah, yeah, and that's really more what my book is focused on. Is once it's happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
and I thank you for because it's hard. It takes courage and persistence more than anything else to write a book about this. So thank you for doing that. And let's start talking about a spouse who doesn't know what to do, like this husband who came to my group and said, "I'm here to learn. I want to be m- most supportive partner I can be, but I don't know how." Sometimes
Mhm.
the best thing is to be silent, sometimes is to ask how they're doing, sometimes that's too much. So let's go through some tips on what to do, what to avoid, what helps, what doesn't. And I'm going to
Mhm.
start with something you say follow their lead. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, yeah. I Because even though I wrote a book on this, their grief is different for every single person. And I think that especially comes true when you're spouses, because generally the relationship you lost is the same relationship, especially if you've been together a long time. Sister is a sister, even though it's a sister-in-law, and especially if it's a child, well, it's your child. So you're the parent, same relationship, except it's not, because everyone reacts to suicide in their own way. And your person that you were talking about is so right. They don't know what to do. Sometimes they want this, sometimes they want that. So I think that first of all, grief needs to be witnessed. And when you're both in grief, that's going to be an incredibly difficult time to be a witness to someone else's grief. I know for me, I couldn't go to any type of group uh, session for years because I didn't want to hear anybody else's story.
Mm,
My story was, I couldn't even manage my story. I didn't want to hear anyone else's, even though in retrospect, again, I think it would have helped for me to know I wasn't alone and because you think you're crazy because you're having all these thoughts you're not used to having. And
mhm,
so I think the most important thing is getting a neutral third party. And I talk about this in my group too, a therapist that's there just for you. If you're both grieving, and I use the image of the tornado in or I think that's what I use in my book. If you were both in the house when the tornado hit, it might be nice to get somebody else to come in and help you do some work. Instead of both of you who lost everything having to support each other. Now, that being said, there are plenty of examples out there of couples who were able to be functional and support each other. But I think the most important thing is to learn how to talk about it, learn how to express. And my book can help with that. Lots of books out there can help with that. Learn how to express what you need right now. And even though it's so hard to even talk about, when someone says, "How are you?" or even, "What can I do for you right now?"
mhm. Yeah.
That's a question, and sometimes you're not even able to answer a question. So what might be better is, "I'm here for you," or "I'm here with you,"
Mhm.
and just sit silently and see what happens after that.
Yeah. One thing that's something you mentioned in your book that is so true. because even I'm thinking about a couple that I know. So the wife lost her father, and they were not close. They hardly ever spoke, really, which, as we know, can be another compounding pain because you don't have time to repair anymore. And he couldn't understand why she was suffering so much. So why you didn't even talk to your father? So you say, well, sometimes we don't have the context of that relationship. So we have to be aware of that too.
Right, exactly. And even spouses might not understand what their spouse is going through in their grief.
Hmm. Yeah. So what are some give us some tips on what to do and what not to do. So you just mentioned something, just focus on witnessing and sitting with them, maybe in silence, because that is very helpful. I read a book and I can never remember which, because I read so many books on grief, especially suicide. But this guy was saying that the best thing I ever had done for me during my, especially the first year, was a friend who came every single day, knocked on my door, we went for a walk, never said a word, came back, and he would just say, "I'll be back tomorrow." And that was it.
Mm, that's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think what for the spouse who's supporting the partner or the spouse, I think the first thing you need to do is work on you. If you feel like you need to fix this and you can't, so that's upsetting you, you need to put that aside because it's not about you. If you want to be supportive to your spouse, make it about your spouse, not about you. And if you can't do that, then you need to encourage your spouse to get help elsewhere. And remember, it takes a village, right? Make this a group effort. It's not all on you.
Mm.
There are other people who might be able to do exactly what your spouse needs and you can't. So
Mhm.
you get other people involved. But first, get yourself out of the way.
Mhm.
Second, figure out how to communicate. And it might mean, like I said, reading a book. It might mean, one idea is have a set of cards or little post it notes or something that say, I want to talk, I don't want to talk, rub my feet and shut up, put on some music, whatever works.
Or
And
leave
just
the
have,
house. Leave the
right,
house.
get out or I'm
Get
leaving,
out.
whatever it is. I need to be with a friend, not you right now. And if your spouse says that, don't take it personally. You
Mhm.
aren't the everything. You need help with this. It does
Yeah.
not need to be, and I'm talking to the spouse who's supporting, it does not need to be all about you cannot come to the full rescue if you're suffering. You
Mm.
need to get support for you. You don't have to talk, right? You don't have to form a thought because of course if you're trying to form a thought and you have grief brain, this is a huge burden. So instead, you just point to the Post-it or you hold up the Post-it, whatever it says. I need ice cream right now. I need a foot rub right now, whatever it is. And so in a calm time, when you can think about the things that might be supportive, you've written out these Post-it notes,
Mhm.
talk to your spouse about this is how you can help me. So when you're not in a calm time, if you're having a sobbing moment, then you can just do this
Mm.
or just say, I don't know what I need right now.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Or I'm open to suggestions.
Mhm.
That's another big issue is when you as the spouse think you can fix this. So you start suggesting things. Well, maybe they're not open to suggesting. Again,
Yeah.
is it about you feeling like you need to fix it? Or is it about you wanting to support your spouse?
Yeah.
They may not be grieving in a way that you agree with, but it's not about whether you agree with it or not. Everyone grieves in their own way, and you need to allow this.
You're talking about fix it. And I remember in this same session, I was talking to him and Spalletti, give me a few tips on what to do and what not to do. And I said, okay, I'll give you one that would be very important. And I said, the next time you look at your spouse and you think, how can I fix this? Look around your house and go fix something else.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's a great
And
suggestion.
she started laughing. She said, "Thank you, Paula. Thank
Yeah,
you. See?"
yeah, like, instead of trying to fix my grief, here's a chore you can do. That's another thing you could
Yeah.
put on the Post-its,
But
right? Or
yeah, but
magnets on the
it's just
fridge.
to say, okay, there's nothing to be fixed. This is something that she or he or they or whatever will go through, and they need to go through it. It's not broken. It's
Right.
just something natural that will happen.
Yeah.
And
You're not broken, you are grieving.
mhm. Yeah, and I think the
Mm,
other thing that helps, because many times what I think gets us stuck in terms of how to help is you have all these ideas on what's better for them, but we never ask, right? So, oh, maybe I'm going to do this. I'm going to, cook this wonderful dinner for her, and she'll get home and everything will be ready. And all she wants to do is go to bed. So, I think the best thing really is to just be very, very sincere and candid about the fact that you don't know what to do. So, just say
mhm,
that. So, listen, there is no way, I don't know how to help you, and what is good today may not be good tomorrow. So just know
mhm.
that I'm open, and I will not get hurt if you tell me this is not helpful today.
That's the most important thing is that you, as the supporter, do not get hurt by something that the griever says or does. They're in grief. So don't tell them they should be any different than they are. That that's not helpful. Just support
Mm-hmm.
whatever they need.
Yeah. And having said that, if you do need to do something, this is something that you talk about in your book too. Offer to do practical things, because I remember in my grief, the day that I realized I was not okay was the day I had to go somewhere, and I had to buy a ticket, and I couldn't do it. And I remember the overwhelming sensation I had when I looked at my computer, and when you do from here to there, and all these options show up, and I could not understand. I could not figure out which one was the best. I couldn't take in that information, and I just shut down my computer and I started crying. So I can't buy a ticket. There is something really wrong with me. And that was the day I called the psychiatrist.
Yeah.
And so, if you do want to do something practical, ask them. You can either follow their lead, like you said, Michelle, follow their lead. You can see that they're struggling with doing their accounting or whatever, picking up their kids every day. She forgets or he forgets. Just offer to do these things, following their lead and asking, not just assuming that you know what they need, but offer to do some practical things.
Yeah. And also, making decisions like you just really clearly made a picture of, um, illustrated, offering to do things like that might not help because you can't make a decision. So if I ask you, Paula, do you want me to make dinner? That might be too much of a question
Mm,
for a grieving brain. So how about just be selfless, make dinner, and if Paula wants to eat it, great. And if she doesn't, then you just clean it up and put it away. And maybe, we'll wake up at 2 in the morning and want a bite. But
mhm.
don't ask any questions you don't actually need the answer to, or ask, and if you can't get an answer, let it go.
Mhm. Yeah.
Because, like you said, it is hard to make decisions when you're in trauma, when you have your grief going on.
Mhm. Yeah. How about emotions? So this is do the practical thing is great for those who have a hard time dealing with the emotion. And I think that one of the best things you can do also is to try to connect with the emotion that they're feeling. But how do you do that if it's hard for you to connect?
Yeah, I think again something practical for the practical people, even within emotions. So you can read. Brene Brown just has this new book out that is fantastic that talks about emotions. I think it's called Atlas of Feelings or Atlas of the Heart. A wonderful book. It's very technical. It's very sciency, considering it's talking about emotions, but it helps you become emotionally knowledgeable. intelligent about emotion. And you can make them accessible to yourself. Back to the post-it note example, you could cut out circles of colored paper, and each one can correspond to an emotion. It could be blue for calm, red for anger, purple for, joy, blue for sadness. I already said blue for calm. Well, you know what I mean. So all of these different options. You could the color you hate the most, whatever that is. Mustard yellow could be, I am just having a really crappy day and I don't even want to talk to you. I don't want to decide what emotion I am having. But that's another way two people can communicate about their emotions. If the person who's the practical one and I can't talk about emotions, and the spouse needs to talk about emotions, maybe the spouse could hand you that little colored piece of paper. And these are just total wild, like, examples. Like, you could do anything that will work for you. It could be ice cream flavors. You have 6 ice cream flavors in the freezer. Today I'm feeling anger, so I'm going to eat this flavor ice cream. And then the spouse knows, okay, that's what that emotion is.
Mm,
Something like that. But again, it comes down to being able to communicate
mhm,
and being able to receive communication. And the hardest thing of all, being able to figure out how you feel. And
mhm.
that's where the mindfulness comes in. Because sometimes when you're in grief, you don't even know how you feel. What is this? Anger, frustration, sadness, fear, maybe even joy. Sometimes there's happiness. And if you've been grieving for a while, you don't even recognize it. What is that? What is
Mhm.
happening? I'm feeling something I don't. Oh, it's joy. I'm enjoying myself, and then guilt, right? Comes
Yeah,
right
yeah.
after. So it's you kind of both have a responsibility. The person who's being supported kind of has to be able to think about what they need and how they feel when they can. Again, this is
Mhm.
not during the, big
Yeah,
emotion
especially
time.
the beginning. Yeah, in the beginning, it's so confusing. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
The other thing that I find is helpful, and this is more not what to do, but what to avoid, is the platitudes, right?
Ugh,
Which so many, I don't know. I think it's enraging sometimes because
it's so, yeah.
it's more about your discomfort than the other person. So someone says, "I think I'm going crazy and then I'll never feel good again." And you go, "No, you're going to be okay."
Mhm.
How do you know you're going to be okay? Right now,
Yeah.
connect with the emotion they're feeling in the moment.
Yeah. That's yes, 100%. And never start a sentence with I can't imagine. Never start any sentence with I, actually, unless it's I'm here for you. Because if you say I can't imagine, you're talking about yourself.
Mhm.
We're not talking about you. We're talking about the person you're supporting. Or you say, uh, you know, like you said, I know you'll feel better. Well,
Mhm.
I mean, that is very likely that, feelings change. And that is one thing that I say. You're guaranteed not to always feel the way that you do right now. I feel 100% confident telling clients that.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
don't feel the same way you did yesterday. But if you're a supporter, also nebecause start a sentence with at least.
Oh, yeah, at least
Never, ever.
look at the bright side, huh?
Yeah. Because if you say at least, what you just did was undermine the person that you're trying to support's feelings. Go the other direction. Validate. Yeah, that is hard. I'm
Mhm.
sorry.
Yeah.
Less is more when it comes to saying things when someone's finally able to communicate their feelings, or even if they're just sobbing. I'm sorry is enough. Don't try to
Mhm.
make it
Yeah.
better. We're not
Mhm.
broken. We're just in
Mhm.
grief.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's very helpful. Um, yeah, I was just thinking of my own experience here. It's hard when you're just trying to connect with your emotions and someone is trying to get you out of them because they're uncomfortable, right?
And yeah, and most people are, because we were raised to not focus on emotions. We're doers, not beers, or we're doers,
Mhm.
not feelers.
Yeah.
And feeling
Yeah.
is hard. It's much easier to go do the dishes than it is to feel sadness.
Mhm. Yeah, like you said, you can just say, that must be really hard, or help them get in touch with it because if they're talking about it, chances are they need to get it out. So you can ask something like, well, that sounds like it's very scary. Is it? Is it scary for you? Are you feeling scared about that? Or I
Mhm.
mean, but dive into the emotion. Not don't just connect with it, but help them get in touch with it and get it out because it like you said, I mean, it will pass because emotions are waves. It comes and it grows then it dies out and then it comes back more intense or not, but it will go away. And that's when the
Mhm.
mindfulness part comes. And I want to keep going because you are a yoga teacher, you are mindfulness focused. So let's talk about the body. What can you do in terms of physicality or breath work, nutrition? Give us a little bit of your knowledge and your wisdom on how can we help ourselves so that we can help our partner.
Okay. Well, first, before we go on to that, I just want to say one more thing about bringing out the emotions. And that is sometimes people don't have the words, like not everyone's read Atlas of the Heart or any of these emotionally intelligent, educational materials. So, what can you relate to? Like, say that you're both runners. You know, is this a steep gravel hill that you're feeling today? Is this a smooth, flat pavement? Is it sand? How do you feel? Think of something the person can really relate to. You're their spouse or supporter. You know them. Um, maybe it's someone who loves to cook Mexican food. You know, did the chilies go flat? Make it something relatable.
Mhm.
Or you can go to a weather pattern or back to a color. If this was a weather, if you could describe your emotions with a weather pattern, what is it today? Are you a tornado, a rainstorm, a bomb cyclone, an atmospheric river? you know,
Portland
something like that.
rain.
Right.
Portland rain. It's a
Something
it's not that much, not that intense, but it's always there, so it's annoying. That's
right,
Portland rain.
exactly. Yes. Right. Yeah, perfect. Something you don't have to talk about emotions by using emotional words, anger, fear, frustration. If you haven't studied emotions, sometimes you don't have a word for how you're feeling, but you might have an image that works with something else that you're
Mm.
very connected to. And so asking deeper questions, or now moving into the yoga therapy, the mindfulness, where do you feel it in your body? So this, moving into this is somatic therapy, right? When we're talking about mindfulness of the body. So in my practice, I connect any emotion has a corresponding physical event. Um, so uh, you're
Can you
sitting
give us
there.
examples of
Yeah, yeah,
where? Yeah.
I'm going there. I'm just I'm like, okay, what's a good one? A lot of times anger or fear comes with tightness in the chest, maybe heat, maybe, you feel a little sweaty. Fear can also come with some similar things like that. You might feel shaky. You might struggle to take a deep breath. And just like we were talking about back at the beginning of the podcast, that awareness can dissipate the intensity of the feeling. So when you're all spun up, and I did this over and over and over in my trauma therapist's office after I developed PTSD post losing Glenn, um, I would be talking about my story, not necessarily my feelings, but my story. And that's what people usually do. For example, I always ask my clients, "How are you feeling today?" And then they go off in a story. Well, she said this and he did that and that happened. And I never get the answer to my question. So I have to teach them, how are you feeling? And when you realize that, and then you go the step further, I'm really upset right now. I'm telling my story and it's causing me to activate. And then my trauma therapist says, Where are you feeling it in your body? And at first, I was so disconnected from my body. All that
Mhm.
question did was irritate me because I
Yeah.
wanted to go on with my spun up story, you
Yeah.
know? But and it's just like developing any skill, you know, it takes some time.
Mhm.
It's just probably one of the most uncomfortable workouts I've ever had in my life.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
eventually I learned, okay, you know what? This conversation hurts my stomach. I
Mhm.
feel nauseous right now. I want to throw up. And then we stop, we breathe, do a connection exercise. Maybe it's connecting to my trauma therapist had this beautiful forested area right outside her window. And she would direct me to look out at the trees,
Mhm.
focus on the green, anything to bring you back into touch with the present moment. Feel your feet on the floor, feel your
Grounding.
behind on your
Yeah.
chair. Yeah, grounding, connecting to something current, something in the present moment to bring you back.
Mhm. Mhm. And it doesn't have, of course, we always, I think most books talk about yoga, right? But do physically speaking, do whatever helps you. I
Mhm.
don't do yoga. I've tried it. So my husband does yoga every single day. He's actually finishing his yoga teaching training, and I've tried it, and I just can't do yoga. I go, no, it bothers me. It's uncomfortable. It's painful sometimes, and no, I have to do but I do other stuff. I love walking, I
Yeah,
love riding my bike, I love dancing, so I do Zumba. So whatever helps you get in touch with your body. It doesn't have to be yoga because most people talk about yoga and mindfulness, right? But it doesn't have to
right.
be that.
Yeah, or if movement hurts because you have some physical situation, you can stand and meditate. Just stand and maybe close your eyes or not,
Mhm.
look down and just focus on your breath for a few breath cycles.
Mhm.
That's basic mindfulness. I do think some movement is important, and mindful exercises are exercises that, and this is why yoga is specifically beneficial. Tai Chi, Qigong, it's the difference between being where you are and not being where you are.
Mhm.
So if you're out on a bike ride, that's great. If you're listening to a podcast or not where you are, then it's not a mindful exercise.
Mhm.
People might be running on a treadmill and be completely mindful of their breath each step,
Mhm.
but they
Yeah.
also might be on the treadmill watching TV.
Mhm.
That means it's
Yeah.
not a
It's
mindful
not a mindful
exercise.
exercise. Yeah. So the
So
important
it's
thing is being the present. Yeah.
right. And I mean, being on the treadmill is good for people who have the type of physiology that they need to run for exercise. That works for some people. So I'm not saying don't go for a run. I'm just saying some exercises are mindful and some aren't. And it's important to do mindful exercise if you want to get in touch with your body, get in
Mhm.
touch with your feelings, and be able to move through them in a more beneficial way, not escaping.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the key word, not escaping, right? So that's
Right?
the opposite of mindfulness. So Michelle, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your wisdom here with us. And how can my listeners find you?
Oh, the best way is inhabitjoy.com. I'm also on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram, but you can find all the links to those social medias there. I'm thinking
Mhm.
about TikTok, but haven't gotten there yet.
Oh.
And I have free meditations on my website, and you can contact me there. And I have lots of opportunities, wellness coaching, I'm running a special right now in 2024 for helping people find their goals, achieve their goals, because a lot of times we set New Year's intentions or New Year's resolutions and then they kind of fall off. So I have a special right now for $24 for a
Mhm.
full hour of coaching to try to
Cool.
get
That's great.
2024 uh try to get where you want to be in
That's
2024.
wonderful. That's
Yeah.
wonderful to know. A very good price because coaching is very expensive.
Yeah. Well, like I said, it's a
Yeah.
special.
Yeah, it's a special. Yeah. Don't get used to it. Thank you so much, Michelle. And the books are Supporting a Survivor of Spouse or Partner Suicide Loss, a mindful guide for co-journeying through grief. And the other one is Surviving Spouse or Partner. So suicide loss, again, a mindful guide for your journey through grief for the loss survivor and for the partner. So I
Yes.
will have the link below in my description so they can find your book. And of course, with the video, I'll have the image of the cover as well. Thank you, Michelle, and you have a great day.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the important work you're doing too. You are quite an inspiration, Paula. Thank you.
Thank you.